a single choice can change the fate of a world. Galadriel stands at the edge of the Girdle of Melian, her hand resting on the ancient tree that marks the boundary of the enchanted kingdom of Doriath. She is about to leave its absolute safety behind, driven by a vision of a shadow growing in the north and a deep need to understand the wider world beyond the familiar woods. This decision risks her standing among her own kin and places her on a path toward unknown perils and ancient powers stirring in Middle-earth. By the end of this story, you will understand the untold journey that forged one of the most powerful and compassionate figures in all of legend. What hidden truths about the First Age did she uncover in the wild lands beyond her home, and how did her early choices shape the great conflicts to come? If you are listening right now, I would love to hear where in the world you are and what the local time is for you. What does it feel like to stand at the edge of everything you know? Just before you take that first step into the unknown, the air shimmered as she passed through the Girdle of Melian, a sensation like a silken thread snapping against her skin before falling away into silence. Suddenly, the world was louder, sharper, and utterly untamed. A herd of deer, startled by her sudden appearance, froze with eyes wide with panic. Without a thought, Galadriel stilled her own racing heart and let the light within her, the inherited grace of the two trees, flow outward in a soft, calming radiance. The animals softened, their tense muscles relaxing, and they melted back into the forest shadows. This was her first true act of power in the wide world, a quiet assertion of her nature, but it did not go unnoticed. From the high branches of the Melian's border, the march wardens of Doriath marked her passing, and their swift-footed messengers carried the news to the throne of Thingol. In the great halls of Menegroth, her departure sparked uneasy debate. Some called it reckless pride, while others saw the stubborn will of her Noldor kin. But the deepest concern festered in the heart of her brother, Finrod Felagund, who felt a bond of foresight stretched thin and feared the darkness his sister was so intent on facing alone. Here, the wilderness was a living entity, and every rustle in the undergrowth, every unnatural stillness in the air, spoke of threats she had only ever heard in guarded tales. The profound isolation was a weight upon her spirit, a constant reminder that the absolute safety of Doriath was now a memory. She could have turned back, her pride stung, but her life secure. Instead, she looked north, toward the brooding peaks of the Ered Luin. It was not a path of clear roads, but one she charted by the whispers on the wind and the subtle pull in her heart, a deep trust in her own inner guidance that overruled all counsel of caution. This choice, to move forward into the deepening shadow, cemented her independence. The stakes of her journey escalated with each league she traveled. The familiar woods gave way to strange, twisted landscapes, where the light seemed to cling less eagerly to the leaves. She began to feel a persistent, unseen gaze, a presence that tracked her movements from just beyond the edge of sight. The comforting memory of the girdle felt like a dream from another age, forcing her to rely entirely on her own strength and the nascent wisdom she carried. One night, as she forded a river that ran like liquid starlight over smooth, pale stones, a new sensation bloomed within her. It was not a fear, but a pull, a gentle drawing of her spirit toward a specific hidden valley nestled between the ancient foothills. An unexpected encounter awaited her there, and her steps quickened, guided by a fate she could not yet see. The hidden valley was a sanctuary of whispered songs and ancient fear. Here, the Nandor elves lived as echoes of a choice made long ago, their lives woven into the moss and stone of a land they refused to leave. They watched her from the shadows of great oaks, their eyes holding a deep suspicion of any who walked the wide roads of the world. Galadriel felt their distrust like a cold mist, but she also felt the land's distress. A grove at the valley's heart was sickening, its leaves curling black, its song silenced by a creeping blight they could not understand. She knew words alone would not bridge the chasm between them, so she did not speak of her lineage or her quest. Instead, she walked to the dying grove and knelt. Closing her eyes, she did not command the trees with force, but instead offered her own spirit in a song of healing. It was a melody of starlight on water and roots drinking deep from the earth, a power that flowed from her into the wounded soil. The light of the two trees, which she carried within her, shimmered in the air, visible only to those who could perceive the unseen world. Slowly, the blackened leaves unfurled into vibrant green, and the grove's silent song returned as a gentle hum in the air. That single act shattered the wall of their fear. The Nandor, who had shunned the call of the Valor and now shunned the wars of Beleriand, saw in her a power that nurtured, not dominated. They brought her into their simple dwellings and spoke in hushed tones of the changes in the land. They told her of a gray wanderer, a figure of immense power who passed through the hills asking strange questions, and of their own kin who had vanished near the mountain passes, taken by things that moved without sound. This was the crucial information she had lacked, concrete evidence of the dark forces she sought. Yet the tension remained. Their leader, an ancient elf named Lothlórien, argued that engaging with these shadows would only bring ruin to their hidden home. He represented their deepest conflict, a desire to remain separate from a world tearing itself apart. Galadriel faced a choice. She could have taken their knowledge and continued her journey, using their warnings as a map toward her own goals. But she chose to stay. She decided that understanding these isolated folk, their fears and their wisdom, was the key to comprehending the fractures that divided all the Elven peoples. She learned their ways of silence and observation, how to read the messages in the wind and the behavior of birds. This decision was not about gathering an army, but about building a connection. It deepened her resolve that true strength lay in unity, not in command. Her presence, however, was a candle in the growing dark. The very light that had healed the grove now acted as a beacon. A shadowy creature, drawn by the surge of power, began to prowl the edges of the settlement at night. Its form was a shifting smear of darkness, and its hunger was a cold pressure in the mind. The confrontation came on a night when the moon was veiled. The creature slipped past the Nandor's sentries, its gaze fixed on Galadriel where she stood guard. It was not a beast of tooth and claw, but a being of pure malice that sought to extinguish her light. A battle of wills erupted in the clearing. Galadriel did not draw a blade. Instead, she stood firm, her inner light flaring into a shield of brilliant white. The creature recoiled, hissing, unable to bear the purity of a power it could not corrupt. It melted back into the forest, defeated for now, but the message was clear. Her journey would be a constant struggle between being a healer and a beacon for terror. With a renewed purpose forged in this first true test, She knew she must seek the source of these threats. The Nandor, no longer seeing her as an outsider, but as their protector, offered her a guide to lead her safely to the shadowed passes of the Luin. Her path was now set, leading directly into the heart of the gathering storm. The narrow mountain trail was a ribbon of crumbling stone against a vast wall of granite. Galadriel moved with an elven grace that seemed to defy the treacherous slope, her feet finding purchase where none appeared to exist. Her Nandor guide, a quiet elf named Callan, was less sure-footed, his breath catching each time he glanced into the dizzying chasm below. His people were of the deep woods, and the sheer, open drop was a terror his soul had never known. Seeing his frozen hesitation on a particularly exposed ledge, Galadriel did not offer empty reassurance. Instead, she stretched out her hand and spoke not of courage, but of trust. "Look only at the stone before you," she urged, her voice a calm counterpoint to the howling wind. "The mountain is not your enemy. It simply asks for your full attention." With her steady presence as his anchor, he focused on her guidance, his terror slowly receding as he inched across the precipice. That shared moment of peril forged a bond stronger than any spoken alliance. As they rested in a shallow cave, Callan's gratitude loosened his tongue. He told her the old legends of the Luin, tales his people seldom shared with outsiders. He spoke of the mountains not as mere rock, but as a refuge for spirits who had lost their way during the great journey, their whispers now carried on the high winds. He mentioned, almost in passing, a place the elders called Amon, the Singing Peak, a spire so high it was said to touch the dome of the stars. The story was cut short by a low rumble that grew into a deafening roar. A rock slide thundered down from above, a cascade of stone and dust that was too precise, too targeted to be a simple act of nature. Galadriel shoved Callan back into the relative safety of the cave mouth as the world dissolved into chaos. When the dust settled, a wall of fresh rubble stood between them, and his voice calling her name was faint and distant, cut off by the immense barrier. She was alone. The mountain had isolated her, and the message was clear. This was a test. With her guide gone, every choice was hers alone. She could have tried for hours to clear the rocks to reunite with Callan, but the whispering wind seemed to coil around her, carrying a challenge. She remembered the Singing Peak. Looking up through the clearing dust, she could see its distant silhouette against the twilight sky. It called to the part of her that sought answers from the highest sources. She made her decision in a heartbeat, turning her back on the blocked path and beginning a solitary climb toward that distant summit. The mountain itself seemed to resist her now. Strange echoes misdirected her, and the wind hissed with half-heard warnings that plucked at her resolve. Each step was a battle of will against a landscape that felt unnervingly aware of her presence. It was testing her worth, her right to be there, pushing her to see if she would break. She did not. As the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky, Galadriel pulled herself onto the summit of Amon. The view stole her breath. Spread out below in a bowl between the peaks lay a valley of impossible beauty, a hidden realm of sparkling lakes and silver-leaf trees. Yet a shadow lay upon it, a creeping stain of darkness that twisted the vibrant colors into muted, sickly hues. It was a blight on the land, a visible wound that called out to her spirit. Her path was no longer a question. The answers and the next great test of her journey waited in that shadowed vale below. The air in the valley of Lómen was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming night flowers, a stark contrast to the thin, cold winds of the peaks. Galadriel moved down the slopes into this hidden realm, her senses alive to its profound silence. It was a land caught in a perfect, fragile moment, a jewel box world shielded from the outside. But as she drew nearer to a clearing, she found the sickness she had seen from above. A spring, which should have bubbled with crystal water, oozed a sluggish, dark stream. The grass around it was withered, and the very air tasted of metal and decay. Without hesitation, she knelt at the water's edge. She placed her hands upon the corrupted soil and closed her eyes, not to command, but to listen. She felt the spring's pain, a deep, resonant ache. In response, she let the light within her, the memory of the two trees, flow forth not as a weapon, but as a gentle, cleansing tide. It poured from her fingertips into the earth, a soft radiance that pushed back the shadow, molecule by molecule. The dark water shimmered, the impurity rising like a mist before dissolving into nothing. With a final, pure surge, the spring burst forth anew, clear and singing over its stones. The act left her momentarily drained, but the valley's song returned, stronger and more grateful than before. This surge of power, however, could not go unseen. From the depths of the surrounding woods, a figure emerged with the slow, deliberate grace of a growing tree. It was Lindalwina, an Ent-Wife of such age that the history of the world was written in the bark of her skin and the deep, knowing pools of her eyes. She was the guardian of this sanctuary, and her voice was a rustle of leaves and cracking stone. "You bring the light of the west into my quiet realm," she intoned, her gaze heavy upon Galadriel. "And with it, you bring the attention of the wide world. I have guarded this valley from the haste and war of elves for ages beyond your counting. Why should I not cast you out now?" The hostility was a palpable force, a wall of ancient grief and mistrust. Galadriel stood her ground, but she did not summon more light or make a claim of nobility. She understood that force would only confirm the Ent-Wife's fears. Instead, she chose to speak the truth she carried in her own heart. "I do not seek to bring war or haste to your home," she replied, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "I seek to understand the shadow that threatens all quiet places. I have seen a vision, not of my own making, of a future where such sanctuaries as Lómen are lost, forgotten, or trampled under a final, lasting night. Our only hope is for the free peoples to remember they are connected." Lindalwina was silent for a long time, the forest itself seeming to hold its breath. Galadriel's words, spoken with empathy rather than demand, had found their mark. The ancient guardian saw not the pride of the Noldor, but the shared love for a world worth preserving. The tension in the air softened. "You speak of a shadow you do not fully see," the Ent-Wife said, her voice now carrying a note of grim resignation. "The poison in my spring was but a tendril, a mere symptom of a deeper sickness. The true danger lies in the mountain's heart, in the delving halls the stout ones abandoned. They awoke something in the deep dark, a presence of old that feeds on light and life. It is there, in the mines of Nogrod, that your shadow has taken root." The threat was no longer a vague fear. It had a name and a place, a tangible danger that demanded action. The stakes of Galadriel's quest had just escalated beyond a personal journey of discovery into a mission that could determine the fate of the entire region. As Galadriel prepared to leave the blessed peace of the valley, she turned to the ancient guardian one last time. "I will go to the mountain's heart," she vowed. "And if my strength and wisdom can prevail, I will return to this place so that you will know the shadow has passed." It was a promise that bound her to this hidden world, a hint of the profound responsibilities she would one day carry for all the lands of Middle-earth. The darkness inside the mine was a physical weight, swallowing the faint light that glowed from Galadriel's upturned palm. It was a light that revealed only more darkness, a labyrinth of tunnels carved by hands long since stilled. The air was thick with the smell of cold stone and ancient dust, a tomb silence broken only by the scuff of her own feet and the distant phantom ring of pickaxes, echoes of the dwarves' great labor, now just a memory haunting the deep places. She moved forward, her fingers tracing the angular runes carved into the tunnel walls. They were warnings, telling of a great delver, a king of greed, who had delved too deep and awakened a terror that could not be put back to sleep. The runes spoke of a sleeper bound below, and with each word she deciphered, a profound sadness settled upon her. This was not just a tale of monsters, but a tragedy of ambition, a lesson in the terrible cost of reaching for too much, too quickly. The very stones seemed to weep with the memory of that fall from grace. Her path was not merely one of distance, but of peril. The dwarves of Nogrod had left more than memories behind. A pressure plate gave way beneath her foot with a soft click, and from the shadows, a volley of rusted iron darts shot across the corridor. She dropped into a low crouch, the projectiles whistling inches above her head to clatter against the far wall. Every sense was strained, her mind working to outthink architects dead for centuries. It was a test of patience and perception, a silent duel with the past. To turn back now would be to let this festering shadow grow, to allow the poison she had cleansed from the valley to return tenfold. The choice was clear, and she made it without hesitation. She would go deeper, down into the heart of the mountain, where the air grew so cold, it burned the lungs and the whispers began. They were not sounds heard with the ear, but thoughts that coiled into her mind like smoke, promising power, offering secrets, trying to find a crack in her resolve. The runes had spoken of a sleeper, but these whispers hinted at something far more terrible, not a beast, but a captured Maia, a spirit of great power, twisted and bound in the deep dark. Its release would not be a simple battle, but a cataclysm. Finally, the narrow tunnel opened into a vast, breathtaking chamber. Its ceiling was lost in shadow, but the walls were studded with raw, uncut gems that glittered in her magical light, casting 1,000 fractured stars across the cavern. In the center of the floor stood a massive stone door, sealed with ancient dwarven sigils that pulsed with a fading, protective energy. For a moment, there was only the profound silence and the glitter of captive starlight. Then the ground trembled. A deep, groaning crack split the air as a fissure raced across the sealed door, and from within the chamber beyond, a slow, rhythmic pounding began, like the beating of a great stone heart. The awakening had begun. The stone door exploded inward. A figure of shifting smoke and captive starlight uncoiled from the chamber, its form a vortex of rage and ancient grief. This was Morafin, a being of song and light now twisted by an age of imprisonment. Its voice was the shriek of grinding stone and the whisper of a dying star. You who carry the light of the west, do you come to bind me again? The cavern trembled, dust and pebbles raining from the ceiling as its chaotic energy lashed out. Galadriel did not flinch. She raised her hands, not in a gesture of attack, but as a conductor before an orchestra, and she began to sing. Her voice was a clear, unwavering thread of silver in the cacophony, a song of binding not with chains of iron, but with strands of memory. She sang of the wind in the high places and the quiet strength of deep roots, reminding the tormented spirit of what it had been before the dark and the greed. The shadow recoiled, held at bay by this wall of pure, focused will. I do not seek to bind you, she called out, her voice straining against the maelstrom. The ones who imprisoned you are dust. I offer you a choice. The Maia's form flickered, torn between a furious desire for freedom and a bewildered spark of its original purpose. Its rage was a tangible force, threatening to bring the entire mountain down upon them both. To simply command it was impossible, to destroy it unthinkable. She stood at a precipice far more dangerous than any mountain ledge. She could feel the temptation to press her will upon it, to use the full force of her power to dominate the chaotic spirit and force it to her command. It would be the swiftest, surest path to safety, the kind of decisive action her Noldor kin would praise. But she saw the tragedy in its eyes, the light corrupted by endless confinement, and she knew that to dominate would be to become like the very force that had created this monster. She chose compassion over control. You are free from this tomb, she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. But your freedom cannot be a storm that destroys the innocent. There is a valley, Lómen, a sanctuary that needs a guardian, not a warden of stone, but a protector of its song. Go there, heal with the land as you were meant to. Let that be your new purpose. The offer hung in the charged air. Morofin was chaotic swirling stilled. The choice was its own to make, a terrifying and novel concept after so long in chains. To accept would mean surrendering its rage for a quiet, humble duty. To refuse would mean facing the one who held the song of binding, risking a different kind of prison. A profound silence fell, broken only by the groan of settling rock. Then, with a sigh that seemed to drain the anger from the very air, the Maia's form softened, the captive starlight within it brightening. It did not speak, but gave a slow, acknowledging bow of its luminous head before dissolving into a mist that seeped upward through the cracks in the cavern ceiling, flowing not toward the world, but toward the hidden valley. The immediate threat was contained, but the victory felt fragile, conditional. Galadriel stood alone in the shattered chamber, the weight of what she had done settling upon her. She had not slain a monster, but negotiated with a hurricane. She had unleashed a power of immense potential into the world, trusting in its capacity for redemption. As she walked back through the dark tunnels and emerged, blinking, into the clean air of the mountainside, one thought was clear. This was beyond her alone. The awakening of such ancient spirits required wisdom greater than her own. She needed to find others who understood these forces, to seek counsel on how to guide a world where such sleeping powers could be stirred. Her path now led away from the wilderness, toward the gathered wisdom of the Elven realms. The salt-laced winds of the Fallas were a shock to her system after the deep silence of the mountains. Here, at the edge of the world, the Elven realm was one of harbors and shipyards, a kingdom built not on hidden enchantments, but on the vast, unpredictable sea. In the great timbered hall of Círdan the shipwright, the air was thick with the scent of brine and seasoned wood, but thicker still with the tension of divided counsel. Galadriel stood before the gathered Sindar lords, her journey from the poisoned valley to the shattered mountain heart laid bare in her testimony. She spoke of the awakened Maia, not as a beast to be slain, but as a symptom of a deeper sickness, a shadow that fed on isolation and fear. Her words meant to unite, instead splintered the room. A lord named Thranduil, his eyes sharp with suspicion, rose to challenge her. You speak of unity, yet you bring the strife of the Noldor to our shores. Your kin are exiles, haunted by a doom of your own making. Why should we trust your vision over the safety of our own borders? His words were echoed by others who saw the mountains as a distant problem, a buffer not worth crossing. They advocated for stronger walls and closed harbors, a retreat into their own strength. The council teetered on the edge of inaction, paralyzed by ancient grievances and a fear of the wider world. Galadriel felt the weight of their distrust, a colder barrier than any stone wall. She could have met their hostility with the fiery pride of her heritage, listing her lineage and her rights. Instead, she looked past Thranduil's accusatory glare and sought the calm, weathered gaze of Círdan. The ancient shipwright had said little, his long fingers tracing the grain of the table, as if reading a map of futures yet uncharted. She made her choice in that silence. She would not fight this battle in the council chamber. After the fractious meeting adjourned with no clear path forward, she approached Círdan, not as a petitioner, but as a fellow guardian. She spoke of the sea, of how its currents connected all shores, and how a shadow in the north could one day cast its long reach even upon these western havens. He listened, and in his eyes she saw a wisdom that measured time in the rising and falling of tides, not in the fleeting passions of political debate. An alliance was forged in that quiet understanding, a pact with a few other lords who saw the looming peril. This was not a grand army, but a network of trust, a scattered few who would watch and listen. The council's indecision had left the northern coasts exposed, a gap in the world's defenses that Galadriel now felt compelled to fill. The true work of unity, she realized, would not be won with eloquent arguments, but with tangible proof. It would require a deed that even the most stubborn traditionalist could not ignore. So when Círdan offered her a commission to scout the northern shores, to seek the root of the strange whispers carried on the east wind, she accepted without hesitation. Her new journey would not be through forest or over mountain, but across the gray, endless sea, its vast horizon holding secrets as old as the world itself. The gray sea was a restless, breathing thing beneath the hull of Círdan's swiftest ship. Galadriel stood at the prow, her hands gripping the smooth, salt-cured wood, learning the vessel's language as it rose and fell with the swells. She was no passive passenger. She worked alongside the Teleri sailors, her elven grace adapting quickly to the complex dance of ropes and sails. Her foresight, once a tool for grand visions, found a new, immediate purpose. She would feel a subtle pressure behind her eyes, a silent warning, and call out a course correction moments before a hidden reef tore at the keel or a sudden squall threatened to shred the canvas. The initial wariness of the crew melted into a grudging respect, then into a genuine camaraderie. During the long night watches, they shared stories their people had carried across the sea, tales of the Isle of Balor. They spoke of it not as a mere island, but as a sanctuary, a place where the very stones remembered the first music of the world, and where wounds of both body and spirit could find mending. This hard-won trust was tested when the sky turned the color of a bruise and the wind began to scream. The storm that descended upon them was not a natural tempest. The waves rose in sharp, malicious peaks, and the rain fell like shards of ice, each drop seeming to carry a whisper of pure malice. The ship was tossed like a toy, the mast groaning under the strain. The sailors fought with desperate skill, but the sea itself was fighting back, as if a conscious will sought to drag them into the abyss. Galadriel knew this was no random squall. It was a direct challenge. Closing her eyes against the stinging spray, she planted her feet on the heaving deck and reached deep into her own spirit. She did not try to fight the storm's fury, but instead sought to answer its chaos with an unbreakable calm. A soft, white light emanated from her, spreading over the raging waters like oil. The shrieking wind softened to a sigh, and the violent waves settled into a steady, rolling rhythm. The display left her breathless, but the awe in the sailor's eyes was unmistakable. Her power was no longer just a tool for healing or negotiation. It was a force that could command the elements. The charts were useless in this bewitched sea. The sailors argued for a cautious, indirect route, fearing more unseen perils, but Galadriel felt a clear, bright line of certainty in her mind, a path charted by her own inner vision. The choice was hers alone. To follow the charts was to accept the limitations of the known world. To trust her sight was to gamble all their lives on a feeling. She turned to the ship's master, her voice steady despite the fatigue. Set a direct course for Balor, she instructed. I will guide you. It was not a request, but a statement of fact, and in that moment, her role shifted irrevocably from advisor to leader. The crew, having seen her mastery over the storm, obeyed without question. The stakes of her quest were no longer just about political alliances or regional threats. This sentient opposition from the very elements suggested that her journey was being watched by powers far beyond the conflicts of elves and men, that her every move was a piece in a much larger, more cosmic struggle. As the last tendrils of the unnatural storm dissipated, a bank of thick, gray mist parted before them. The Isle of Balor emerged from the haze, its shores lush and green, humming with a deep, resonant energy that she could feel in her bones. Yet the peace of the sight was overshadowed by a new, more personal sensation. A profound pull, gentle yet undeniable, drew her gaze toward the island's heart, to a specific grove of ancient, silver-barked trees. Something, or someone, of immense age and power was waiting there, and it had been expecting her. The grove of silver trees hummed with a music older than the sun. At its heart stood a circle of weathered stones, their surfaces smooth as sea glass, and within that circle, a figure moved with the unhurried rhythm of the turning world. She was Irme, a Vanya elf whose hair held the pale gold of a sky before dawn, and whose eyes held the light of a land Galadriel had only ever known in song. Without a word, they fell into a shared task, their hands tending to a cluster of saplings whose leaves glowed with a soft, internal radiance. These were the white trees, living vessels holding the last echo of the light of the two trees of Valinor. To touch their bark was to feel a memory of a world without shadow. As they worked, Irma spoke, and her words were not mere stories, but waking visions. Galadriel saw the shores of Eldamur, bathed in a light that was both silver and gold, and felt the profound joy of her peoples, first awakening under the stars. She witnessed the making of the great ships and the sorrow of those, like Irma, who chose to remain, becoming anchors of that ancient light in the wider, needier world. This was not the proud, fiery history of the Noldor, but a deeper, more sorrowful legacy of guardianship. It redefined the light Galadriel carried within her. It was not just a gift, but a sacred trust passed down across countless years. Yet when Galadriel spoke of the shadow in the north, of the corrupted Maia and the poisoned lands, Irma's serene expression hardened. "My purpose is here," she stated, her voice as firm as the ancient stones around them. "To preserve this grove is my only war. To step into the conflicts of Middle-earth is to risk scattering this last, pure light to the winds." Her resistance was a wall of peaceful conviction, a belief that the best way to protect a treasure was to hide it forever. Galadriel faced a test of persuasion more delicate than any battle of wills. She did not argue or demand. Instead, she gestured to the youngest sapling, its light flickering like a fragile flame. "A shadow that extinguishes one light does not stop there," she said softly. "It grows hungrier. If we hide while the world darkens, who will be left to remember what this light even means? We preserve this grove not by building higher walls, but by ensuring there remains a world outside that is worthy of its memory." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Irma looked from Galadriel's determined face to the vulnerable sapling, and the certainty of ages in her eyes finally wavered. She saw the truth in the younger elf's words. Isolation was a beautiful, fragile dream, but the storm was now awake and seeking out every haven. With a slow, solemn nod, Irma conceded. "Then you must be its shield," she said, her voice thick with a grief for the peace she was surrendering. "Places like this cannot remain secrets forever. They must become strongholds." In that moment, Galadriel's purpose crystallized. She made a vow, not just to Irma, but to the very light in the trees. "I will protect this legacy. I will make such groves the heart of our resistance." This was no longer a quest for personal understanding, but a declaration of a lifelong mission. The stakes of her journey were now absolute. Irma, her resolve hardened by Galadriel's conviction, then shared the gravest truth. "The shadow you feel is not a mindless force. It is guided. A fallen Maia, one who once served the great enemy, seeks out these wells of pure light, not to avoid them, but to corrupt them, to twist their essence into something terrible and new. Your mission is not one of exploration, but of active defense. The enemy knows what you are protecting, and it is coming." With this chilling revelation settling in her heart, Galadriel accepted a final gift from the grove, a single sapling, its roots carefully wrapped in cloth of silver. Its tiny light was a profound responsibility. As she walked back to the ship, the weight of the future was in her hands. Her course was no longer a question. She would sail not just toward the shadow, but directly into its path, to the northern lands where the fallen Maia gathered its strength, armed with a new resolve and a living spark of the ancient world she was sworn to defend. The northern shore was a shattered landscape of black rock and grinding ice. Galadriel stepped onto the desolate beach, the little sapling of the white tree, a warm, living weight against her chest, a stark contrast to the deathly chill in the air. She raised her hand, and a soft radiance bloomed from her palm, pushing back the gloom and revealing a path of stable stone through a treacherous field of half-frozen marsh. Her light became their guide and their shield, a portable hearth around which her small company of sailors huddled, its warmth fending off a cold that could freeze blood in moments. In this relentless environment, shared hardship forged bonds stronger than any formal oath. They were no longer a crew and a passenger, but a single unit, surviving by trust and shared breath. Their path led them to a discovery that stole the warmth from their hearts. Jutting from a glacier were the ruins of structures built from stones so large, their movement defied comprehension. The architecture was utterly alien, with arches that seemed to defy gravity and carvings of strange, non-human figures gazing at stars in unfamiliar constellations. This was a civilization that had risen and fallen before the first elves ever awoke, a truth that placed their own struggles into a terrifying, ancient perspective. The shadow they faced was not new. It was a recurring blight on the world. The hunt began with a chorus of guttural howls that echoed across the icy plains. A pack of wargs larger and more cunning than any they had heard of in southern tales drove them from the ruins. Their leader was a grizzled Orc Chieftain, whose one good eye gleamed with a cruel, calculating intelligence. He did not merely attack, he herded them, using the terrain to his advantage, forcing Galadriel's group into narrow ravines and across unstable ice. She could not simply blast them with light, for the effort would drain her and leave her companions defenseless. Instead, she used her mind. She directed her sailors to create avalanches with well-placed strikes, to lure the wargs onto thinly frozen lakes, turning the environment that threatened them into their greatest weapon. It was a tense, exhausting game of predator and prey, fought step by frozen step. The final confrontation came in a narrow pass. The chieftain cornered them, his massive warg snarling. Galadriel met his charge not with a sword, but with a concussive burst of pure energy that threw him from his beast and left him dazed and defenseless at her feet. Her sailors urged a swift execution, their eyes on the circling wargs. This was the way of the world, to destroy a clear and present evil. But Galadriel looked at the defeated creature and saw not a monster, but another being twisted by a greater darkness. Annihilation was the shadow's way. She made a different choice. She knelt, her voice calm but unyielding. "Go back to the master you serve," she commanded. "Tell him that the light remembers its enemies. Tell him I am coming." She offered not death, but a message, a belief that even this creature could carry a seed of fear back to its source. The chieftain scrambled away, his pack melting into the fog behind him. His retreat was not a rout, but a disciplined, organized withdrawal. They moved with a purpose that spoke of a unified command, a military structure far beyond the chaotic bands of orcs reported in the south. The chilling realization settled over Galadriel. She was not hunting scattered threats. She was walking into the prepared territory of a coordinated enemy, an army with a mind. The trail of the retreating orcs was easy to follow. a scar of malice, leading south toward a jagged range of mountains that belched black smoke into the sky. As they drew nearer, the very air changed, growing thick and acrid, each breath tasting of ash and a profound, ancient hatred. The foothills of Thangorodrim were a hellscape of jagged black rock and swirling ash. Galadriel led her small company along a treacherous ridge, the heat from the volcanic vents below warming the stone beneath their feet. To keep them hidden, she wove an illusion of shifting shadows and fractured light around their camp, a delicate spell that mirrored the land's own chaotic glare. It was a constant drain on her focus, a veil that had to move and breathe with the environment itself. The scouts she sent out returned with grim faces and graver news. They spoke not of disorganized bands, but of disciplined patrols, orcs marching in tight formations, flanked by hulking trolls and things that were little more than clots of shadow given hungry form. This was no mere outpost. It was the heart of the enemy's war machine, a crucible where armies were being forged. The tension snapped when one of their swiftest scouts failed to return. Panic was a luxury they could not afford. Using a shared communion of mind, a silent thread of thought, she stretched between her and her sailors. Galadriel located him. He was alive, taken to a fortified outpost, carved into the side of a scorched mountain, a nest of watchtowers and crude palisades. A direct assault would be suicide. A stealthy infiltration would be too slow. She needed a solution that was both swift and surgical. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. We will not fight their entire garrison, she told her company. We will give them something louder to worry about. Guiding her small group to a precarious ledge overlooking the outpost, she placed her hands upon the unstable cliff face. She did not shatter it with brute force. Instead, she sang a single, clear note that resonated deep within the mountain's bones, finding the precise fault lines weakened by fire and time. With a groan that built into a thunderous roar, a controlled section of the mountain sheared away. The rockslide was a calculated avalanche, a river of stone that slammed into the outpost's main gate, obliterating it and sending orcs scrambling in chaotic alarm. Under the cover of the deafening noise and the blinding dust cloud, her team slipped into the chaos. They found their scout in a cage, and within moments, they were retreating back into the jagged landscape. The rescue was a success, but the cost of their victory was immediate. As the dust began to settle, a shrill cry pierced the smoky air, a sound that froze the blood. High above, a winged shape, vast and terrible, began to circle. It was not a beast of flesh and blood, but a creature of shadow and flame, a fell servant of the Dark Lord himself. Their presence was no longer a secret. They had traded obscurity for a rescue, and in doing so, had drawn the direct gaze of Morgoth's lieutenants. There was no time for relief or rest. Galadriel gathered her shaken but loyal company and led them down from the exposed ridges, plunging into the deep, shadowy ravine that cut through the foothills. Somewhere in its labyrinthine depths, the old tales whispered of a hidden pass, a forgotten path that might yet offer them a way to see the heart of the enemy without being seen. The ravine walls closed in like the jaws of a stone beast, swallowing the fiery sky and the circling cry of the winged terror above. Galadriel pressed forward, her senses reaching out through the oppressive dark until her fingers found not rough rock, but a smooth, arched opening veiled by a waterfall of ancient, brittle vines. This was the hidden pass of Anak, a wound in the mountain, carved by forgotten rivers and abandoned by time itself. The air that sighed from its depths was cold and carried the taste of ages. With a gesture, she summoned a soft, steady light from the palm of her hand, a star to guide them into the absolute blackness. The tunnel was a tight, winding throat of stone, its floor a treacherous slope of loose scree. Each footstep echoed with a finality that reminded them there was no easy way back. As her light brushed the walls, it revealed the reason for the pass's deep silence. The smooth stone was covered in immense, sprawling carvings. They depicted a war of gods, the valor in forms of terrible majesty, clashing with a shadow so vast it blotted out the stars. This was the first war, the great battle against the original Dark Lord, a conflict that shattered continents and shaped the world. A profound realization settled over Galadriel. The shadow she faced was not a new enemy, but an ancient one, a cycle of darkness that had returned. The struggle was eternal. The deeper they went, the more the air began to hum with a latent power. The path ahead was blocked by a chasm, bridged only by a narrow, natural arch of stone. As Galadriel set foot upon it, the very rock on either side of the bridge stirred. Two figures emerged from the walls, their bodies formed of seamless, living stone, and their eyes glowing with a pale, judging light. These were the guardians of Anak, left by the valor not as mere sentries, but as tests of the spirit. They did not attack, but stood implacable, their silent presence demanding an answer to a question not yet asked. Her sailors drew their blades, ready for a fight that would surely see them shattered against these ancient wards. But Galadriel knew steel was useless here. This was a trial of intent. She could have tried to conceal the sapling, to mask her own powerful spirit and sneak past. Instead, she made the braver choice. She stepped forward, completely open, and drew the sapling of the white tree from its protective wrapping. Its pure, gentle light filled the cavern, a stark contrast to the grim history on the walls. She offered it not as a shield, but as her testimony. "We carry no weapon, but this memory of the light we serve," she declared, her voice clear in the humming silence. "We seek not to conquer, but to preserve." The stone guardians did not move for a long moment, their luminous eyes fixed on the sapling's glow. Then, as one, they bowed their great heads and stepped back, melting into the walls from which they came. The way was open. A deep, grinding rumble filled the pass as the guardians spoke a final warning in a language of shifting stone. "The path you seek lies ahead, but the one you leave behind is closing. Your retreat is now sealed." The commitment was absolute. There would be no turning back, no faltering. They were bound to this course, their fate tied to the shadow ahead. With a final surge of resolve, Galadriel led them through the last stretch of the tunnel and out into a sight that stole the breath from her lungs. They emerged on a high ledge, overlooking a vast, fortified valley. Below, under a sky stained red by volcanic fire, sprawled the heart of the enemy. Dark towers clawed at the heavens, and the land was carved into pits and forges where countless fires burned. The scale of the operation was staggering, a hive of industry devoted solely to destruction. It was a vision of a world remade in shadow, and it hardened her heart for the trials she now knew were inevitable. The volcanic glare from the valley below painted their faces in shifting hues of orange and black. Galadriel established a hidden perch on a narrow ridge, a precarious shelf of rock that offered a clear view into the heart of the enemy's domain. For days unending, she and her sailors watched, their eyes tracing the ceaseless flow of troops and supplies. She mapped the fortifications in her mind, noting the brutal architecture of the dark towers and the deep pits where monstrous shapes were chained. Most importantly, she identified the key leaders, the tall, armored lieutenants who moved with a cruel purpose among the lesser orcs, their voices carrying the chilling echo of command. This meticulous observation revealed a terrifying truth. The forces were not merely gathering, they were being organized into regiments and supplied for a massive, coordinated push southward, a tide of shadow aimed directly at the vulnerable elven realms she had just left. Every silent breath she took was measured against the fear of discovery. Patrols of wargs and their riders passed so close that the foul scent of their fur filled the air, and the crunch of their footsteps on the scree below was a constant, grinding reminder of their peril. The strain was a physical weight on her companions, their hands clenched white around their weapons, their eyes wide in the perpetual gloom. Galadriel faced a critical choice. They could all attempt the perilous retreat back through the sealed pass, but that would mean abandoning their hard-won intelligence. Instead, she made a calculated decision that split their small strength. She entrusted the fastest and most agile of her sailors with a detailed warning, a message carved onto a thin slate, and sent him alone to navigate the hidden pass and carry the alert to Círdan. It was a terrible gamble, placing the fate of countless lives on the speed of one runner and the hope that the path remained traversable. With their number now halved, Galadriel and her remaining few prepared for an even more dangerous task. They would stay and strike, aiming to sever the enemy's sinews by sabotaging their supply lines. The stakes of their mission escalated from observation to active warfare, their small band now a thorn deliberately pressed into the side of a giant. Under the oppressive cloak of a moonless night, she led them down from the ridge, their movements as silent as shadows. Their target was a storage cavern, belching black smoke, its entrance guarded by hulking trolls. Her goal was not a glorious battle, but a swift and devastating act of disruption, a desperate bid to buy the Free Peoples the one thing they needed most: time. The enemy's main forge was a cavernous maw of fire and noise, its air thick with the stench of sulfur and the screams of tormented metal. Galadriel slipped through the chaotic shadows cast by the massive smelters, her mind a calm center in the storm of industry. She observed the enslaved laborers, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, and the flow of raw ore to the finished, cursed blades. Her eyes, however, were not on the weapons themselves, but on the architecture of the place. She saw the immense, rusted iron pillars that supported the cavern's ceiling, their bases weakened by centuries of intense heat and stress. This was not a task for blunt destruction, but for precise application. Drawing on the deep knowledge of metallurgy she had learned from the Dwarven runes and her own Noldor heritage, she moved like a ghost. She did not need to shatter the pillars with force. Instead, she focused her will, channeling a subtle, intense heat into the specific crystalline structures of the iron at their most critical stress points. It was a silent, invisible sabotage, a carefully calculated act of engineering that turned the forge's own destructive energy against itself. With a final, focused push, she heard the groan of protesting metal deep within the pillars. A sharp crack echoed, followed by a deafening roar as a section of the cavern roof gave way. A controlled collapse of rock and machinery buried the main smelting channels, silencing the hammers and plunging the forge into chaos. The immediate consequence was a wave of disorganization that rippled through the enemy ranks. Orcs scrambled in confusion, and patrols were pulled from their posts to contain the disaster and dig out their trapped masters. Production ground to a halt, but as she melted back into the steam-filled tunnels, Galadriel knew the victory had a price. She was no longer an unseen observer. She had become a target. To ensure the enemy understood this was not an accident, she made a deliberate choice. From a small pouch, she took a single white feather, a gift from the seabirds of Balor. She placed it carefully on a prominent, soot-blackened anvil, a stark symbol of purity amid the ruin. It was a message, a psychological declaration that the light was not merely hiding, but striking back. The hunt began in earnest. Search parties flooded the tunnels, their guttural cries echoing through the stone maze. Galadriel's small group moved with desperate speed, her foresight guiding them through branching passages just moments before enemy patrols sealed them off. She was their shield and their compass, her mind a map of their escape, constantly ensuring the path behind them remained open even as the net tightened around them. The stakes of this deadly game escalated sharply when a new presence entered the hunt. The enemy commander, a tall, cold-eyed lieutenant of Morgoth named Goroth, took personal command. His intelligence was a palpable force in the tunnels, his strategies adapting to her moves with a chilling precision. This was no longer a chase against brutes, but a duel of wits against a foe whose power and cunning matched her own. Driven deeper into the volcanic heart of the valley, with Goroth's forces closing in from all sides, Galadriel guided her companions into a sudden, unexpected refuge. A network of hot springs opened before them, where mineral-rich waters bubbled from the rock, filling the caverns with a thick, concealing steam. The air was warm and heavy, with the scent of sulfur and earth, a temporary sanctuary where the hunt was momentarily blinded, and the sound of pursuit was muffled by the constant, gentle roar of the water. The steam was a warm, wet shroud that clung to their skin, muffling the distant sounds of the hunt. In this sanctuary of bubbling water and stone, Galadriel knelt beside one of her sailors, a young elf named Liran, whose arm bore a deep gash from a jagged rock during their frantic escape. The water around them was rich with minerals, and she channeled her own light through it, guiding its natural healing properties into the wound. The flesh began to knit together under her hands, the inflammation receding as she sang a soft song of mending, a quiet counterpoint to the cavern's gentle roar. While her companions rested, she did not. With careful hands, she wove nearly invisible threads of energy across the main entrance to the springs, a delicate web that would tremble and alert her mind at the first sign of an intrusion. This small pocket of peace was both a refuge and a trap, and she would not be caught unaware. Around the geothermal pools, the company shared hushed stories of homes they missed and loved ones they fought to protect. These were not tales of grand heroes, but simple memories of starlight on a familiar river or the sound of a parent's voice, forging a bond of shared vulnerability that strengthened their resolve more than any oath of allegiance ever could. The tension of their fragile safety shattered when a single, limping orc stumbled through the steam, his crude armor askew and one arm clutched to his chest. He was lost, separated from his patrol, and his wide, yellow eyes darted in terror at the ring of elves suddenly surrounding him. Lóren and the others raised their blades, their faces hard with the memory of recent pursuit. This was the enemy, simple and clear. To kill him was the safe choice, the logical end to a threat. Galadriel looked at the creature, not as a monster, but as a being driven by fear and pain, another thread in the vast tapestry of suffering woven by the Dark Lord. She saw a choice, not between mercy and pragmatism, but between continuing a cycle of annihilation or attempting to break it. She stepped forward, her hands open and empty. She did not speak his harsh native tongue, but instead projected a simple image into his mind, a map of the steam-filled caverns leading to a narrow fissure that opened onto a desolate, but unguarded, slope. Then she sent a feeling, a clear choice, the concept of walking away from the war, of finding a hole to hide in and simply surviving. The orc stared at her, confusion and a flicker of something like hope warring in his brutish face. Then he scrambled to his feet and fled into the steam, following the mental path she had laid out. Her sailors were stunned into silence, their trust in her warring with generations of ingrained hatred. She had gambled everything on the chance that a spark of free will could survive even in such a corrupted heart, that the story of this mercy might spread as a quiet rumor among the ranks, a seed of doubt against the absolute tyranny of their master. It was a risk that could lead Goroth's forces directly to their hiding place, or it could, just possibly, begin to erode the enemy's foundation from within. As they gathered their few belongings to move, the humid air around Galadriel seemed to thin and change. A presence, at once alien and deeply familiar, brushed against the edges of her perception. It was not the crude malice of orcs or the cold calculation of Goroth, but something older, a power that walked the world unseen, and it was moving toward the hot springs. The steam parted not with a weapon, but with a pickaxe. A stout figure emerged from a side tunnel no elf would have noticed, his broad form clad in mail of interlocking rings, and his beard braided with iron beads. He was Bofri, a dwarven scout from the halls of Nogrod, and his eyes, sharp as chisel points, assessed the elven company with a mix of suspicion and grudging respect. "We have watched your work from the deep places," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "You make a fine mess for one so slender, but a mess without a plan is just noise." Galadriel stood her ground, her own light a soft contrast to his hardened presence. She saw not an enemy, but a potential ally who knew the bones of this land better than any. Their first council was held in the echoing dark, a tense exchange where old grievances hung in the air like the sulphurous mist. One of Bofri's warriors spat at the mention of Doriath, his words echoing the ancient strife over a necklace of gems. One of Galadriel's sailors retorted with a tale of dwarven greed, of delving too deep and awakening the very shadows they now faced. The tension threatened to shatter their fragile meeting before it began. Galadriel did not silence the arguments. Instead, she gave them space to breathe, acknowledging the weight of history before steering it toward the immediate, shared terror. "We can nurse our grievances in the ashes of a conquered world," she stated, her voice cutting through the anger, "or we can use them as stones to build a wall against the fire." Our choice is not between trust and mistrust, but between a shared fight and a certain fall. Her focus was pragmatic. She shared her detailed maps of the enemy's surface movements, while Bofri unrolled a labyrinthine chart of the deep tunnels, routes carved by his ancestors that ran like veins beneath the enemy's fortifications. The elves offered foresight and stealth, the dwarves unshakable strength, and a knowledge of stone that was almost a language. Bofri proposed a joint strike, a daring plan to collapse a key signal tower that coordinated the enemy's patrols. It was a target of strategic brilliance, but it required the elves to follow the dwarves into the absolute dark, placing their lives entirely in the hands of a people they had long considered untrustworthy. Galadriel looked from the determined, weathered face of Bofri to the anxious eyes of her own loyal sailors. This was the crucible. To refuse was to stay safe and alone, and ultimately, to lose. To agree was to gamble everything on a thread of newfound understanding. She gave a single, firm nod. "We will follow your lead underground." The alliance was sealed not with a feast or an oath, but with a shared, grim purpose. As a great ash storm began to brew outside, cloaking the land in a gray haze, the combined force moved out. Elves and dwarves fell into an uneasy rhythm, a silent column descending into the deep, dark arteries of the earth, their fate now bound together in the belly of the mountain. The deep tunnels echoed with the heavy tread of dwarven boots and the near-silent footfalls of elven scouts. Galadriel moved beside Bofri, the air growing colder as they ascended through a forgotten chimney of rock that opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking the signal tower. The structure was a spike of black iron and obsidian, pulsing with a malevolent red light from a dark crystal mounted at its peak. Below, the enemy camp sprawled in organized chaos, its rhythms guided by the beacon's constant, baleful glow. Bofri pointed a thick finger toward the main gate, a massive construction of bronze and hardened wood. "My kin will take the gate," he grunted, "but we need their eyes pulled away." Galadriel nodded, signaling her elven archers. They melted into the shadows along the ridge, and moments later, a series of fires bloomed at the far end of the camp, drawing shouts and the clatter of armor as patrols scrambled toward the false threat. With the diversion underway, the dwarves moved. They did not charge. They advanced like a force of nature, their great rams swinging in unison against the gate. The sound was a thunderous, rhythmic boom that shook the very foundations of the tower. As the dwarven assault reached its crescendo, Galadriel began her own solitary climb. The tower's surface was slick with volcanic ash, but she found handholds in the twisted iron, pulling herself upward with a relentless grace. Her goal was the crystal, its dark energy, a cold pressure against her skin. Reaching the summit, she placed her hands upon its faceted surface. It did not shatter at her touch. Instead, she poured her own inner light into it, a pure, white radiance fighting the ingrained shadow. The crystal screamed, a high-pitched shriek of psychic agony, before it fractured from within and exploded into a shower of inert, black dust. The red light died, and the valley below fell into a sudden, profound silence, broken only by the confused shouts of the leaderless orcs. The silence was short-lived. A new sound rose from the base of the tower, the disciplined march of heavy armor. Goroth, the enemy commander, had arrived with his personal guard, their cold eyes fixed on the elves and dwarves now trapped on the tower steps. A fierce battle erupted, a clash of steel and snarled oaths. Galadriel descended into the fray, her own blade a flash of silver, but but her eyes were locked on Goroth. He was taller than the others, his armor etched with forgotten constellations, and in his gaze she saw not mindless hate, but a deep, frozen sorrow. She made a choice that defied all military logic. She lowered her sword and spoke, her voice carrying over the din of combat. "I see the light you once carried, Goroth. The memory of the stars is not entirely lost to you. You served a purpose of order, not this chaos. Stand down, remember what you were." The commander froze, his weapon wavering. A flicker of something like recognition, like pain, crossed his features. The gamble seemed to teeter on the edge of success, a crack appearing in the armor of his damnation. But the moment shattered as his second in command, a halting brute named Urzog, roared in fury. He saw his master's hesitation as weakness. With a brutal swing of his axe, Urzog struck Goroth down from behind, seizing command of the guard. The renewed assault was immediate and brutal, aimed directly at Galadriel. Urzog possessed none of Goroth's tragic depth, only a savage hunger for destruction. The confrontation now tested her combat skills to their absolute limit. She parried his massive blows, her arms aching with the impact, using her speed and agility to evade his crushing strength. It was a dance of death on the narrow stairs, and she knew a single misstep would be her end. With a final, desperate feint, she lured him into an overcommitment, his axe embedding deep into the stone of the step. In that opening, her blade found its mark. The battle was won. The enemy forces, their coordination shattered, began to fall back in disarray. Galadriel stood breathing heavily, a shallow cut on her arm weeping blood, her body humming with exhaustion. She looked out over the valley as the disorganized ranks of the enemy retreated into the smoky distance. Their victory had bought a precious delay, but the vast, industrial might of the dark fortress remained, already beginning to adapt and reform. This was not an end, but a single, hard-won breath before the storm resumed. The acrid taste of victory was ash in their mouths as Galadriel directed the retreat. Bofri led them not back the way they had come, but into a fissure in the mountain wall, a Dwarven escape route known only to his people. The tunnels were a sanctuary of cool, dark stone, but the respite was brief. The enemy's response was swift and brutal. A new kind of hunter was unleashed, massive hounds with eyes like glowing coals that could track a scent over bare rock. The relentless baying echoed through the stone corridors, a constant reminder that the shadows were still on their heels. Galadriel moved tirelessly among the wounded, her hands glowing with a soft light as she sealed gashes and lent her own strength to those struggling to keep pace. She carried a young dwarf over her own shoulders when his leg could no longer bear his weight, a silent declaration that no one, elf or dwarf, would be abandoned. In that shared flight, the last vestiges of formal suspicion crumbled. An elven archer shared his last water with a dwarf whose beard was matted with dust and blood. A dwarven warrior, in turn, used his own broad back to shield an exhausted elf from a collapsing section of tunnel. They were no longer allies of convenience, but a single, battered company bound by survival. Yet Galadriel knew their current path was a death sentence. The hunters were too close, their pace too fast. The entire group would be run to ground and slaughtered. As they reached a fork in the deep passages, she made her choice. She would draw the hunt away. She pressed the detailed maps into Boffer's hands, her voice leaving no room for argument. Get them to safety. I will lead the hounds on a sweeter trail. The risk was immense. If she were captured, the enemy would gain not just a prisoner, but a symbol. The daughter of Finarfin, a living relic of the light of Valinor, in chains, would shatter the morale of every free kingdom. Her personal fate became inextricably linked to the hope of all their peoples. She broke from the group, climbing a treacherous chimney back to the surface, making sure to leave a clear, tempting trail of displaced stones and a shred of her cloak. The gamble worked. The baying of the hounds shifted, following her scent with renewed frenzy. Alone, her weariness became a leaden weight. She pushed her body to its limits, a solitary figure fleeing across a blasted plain of sharp black glass, the hunters closing the distance with every passing hour. Her path, carefully chosen to lead them away from her friends, now funneled her into a trap of her own making, a dead-end canyon whose sheer walls rose like prison bars. The canyon narrowed to a solid wall of rock. She turned to face the entrance, the guttural snarls of the tracking beasts, and the harsh shouts of their orc masters filling the confined space. She was cornered, exhausted, and outnumbered, but as she stood with her back to the stone, a cold clarity settled over her. The hunters had become the hunted. She had led them here for a reason. Now, in this desolate box canyon, she would use the land itself as her weapon. The canyon walls threw her own breath back at her, a tight circle of stone that amplified every snarl from the approaching hounds. Galadriel stood motionless, her mind working faster than her racing heart. She closed her eyes and listened, truly listened, to the peculiar acoustics of this dead end. A single whisper, when placed just so, could bounce and multiply into a chorus. She took a deep breath and began to speak, not in a shout, but in a series of carefully pitched phrases thrown at precise angles against the rock. From the mouths of shadowy alcoves, her voice seemed to call out challenges. From high ledges, it sang fragments of elven war songs. The echoing voices created the perfect illusion of a large, prepared force lying in ambush. The hounds skidded to a halt, their glowing eyes darting in confusion as their keen senses were utterly betrayed by the stone itself. The orc patrols stumbled into each other, weapons raised against phantoms, their coordinated hunt dissolving into a chaotic mess of shouted questions and blind swings at empty air. Her ruse had bought her precious minutes, but the victory was hollow. The cliffs were unscalable, and the only exit was now blocked by a frustrated, regrouping enemy. She was still trapped. The discord below suddenly stilled as the ranks parted. The enemy commander, the one who had slain Goroth, strode forward. His gaze swept the empty canyon, then locked onto her solitary figure. He did not smile. "You fight with tricks and echoes," he said, his voice a low rumble that needed no amplification. But a shadow cannot be banished with clever words. What are you, really, that you would choose this forgotten hole as your tomb? This was no longer a battle of strength, but a duel of wills fought with syllables instead of swords. Galadriel knew that any claim of power would be seen as a bluff. Any plea for mercy would be a sign of weakness. She had to speak a truth so undeniable it would shake the very foundation of his certainty. She drew herself up to her full height, and the light within her, which she had long concealed, she let shine forth, not in a blinding flash, but as a steady, unwavering radiance. I am Galadriel of the House of Finarfin, she declared, her voice clear and resonant. My blood carries the light of the two trees of Valinor from beyond the western sea. I do not hide from you, I stand against you. This was no boast of lineage. It was a statement of origin and purpose, a declaration that the ancient light of the world was not a memory, but a living force that still stood against the darkness. The name and the power it represented rippled through the ranks of the lesser orcs. A few took a half step back, their brutish faces clouded with something akin to ancestral dread, a ghost of a memory from a time before the shadow wholly claimed them. The commander watched this subtle shift, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something beyond cold command in his eyes. It was a grudging respect. Your courage is noteworthy, he conceded, his tone shifting from contempt to a pragmatic, almost tempting offer. To extinguish such a light is a waste. Join me, pledge your service to the new power that will reshape this world, and you will wield influence beyond any petty elven queen. You can guide this new order, shape it with that strength you hold. To remain here is to die as a symbol. To come with me is to live as a power. The choice was a masterstroke, a temptation that struck directly at the pride of her Noldor heritage. It offered her everything her kin had once sought, power and dominion, but at the cost of her very soul. It tested her core value, the belief that true strength lay in preservation, not domination. As she stood there, the weight of his offer pressing down on her, a familiar, thunderous roar split the sky above the canyon rim. The great eagles, their vast wings blotting out the smoky sky, descended into the canyon like plunging stars. Their arrival was not a chance event, but an answer, a tangible sign that her unwavering stand for the light had been seen and would not be abandoned. The shadow of the eagles was a promise of salvation falling from the sky. Thorondor, the Lord of Eagles, led the descent, his vast wings beating the smoky air into a gale that sent orcs stumbling and the foul hounds cowering. Talons like scimitars of polished stone tore into the enemy ranks, scattering them in a whirlwind of feathers and terror. Galadriel did not hesitate. As Thorondor swept low over the canyon floor, she reached up, her fingers finding purchase in the dense, warm feathers of his shoulder. With a final surge of strength, she pulled herself onto his broad back, trusting completely in this ancient, unlooked-for alliance. The wind tore at her hair as they rose, a violent ascent out of the stone trap and into the open, ash-choked sky. Below, the furious enemy commander screamed orders, and a hail of black arrows and jagged, dark spells streaked upward after them. Galadriel turned on the eagle's back, raising a hand not in attack, but in defense. A shimmering dome of pure white light sprang into being around them, a shield woven from her own spirit. The arrows shattered against it, and the dark spells unraveled into harmless smoke upon contact, her will a bulwark against the shadow's malice. Yet as they gained altitude and safety seemed assured, she made a choice that defied all instinct. Leaning forward, she spoke into the wind, her voice clear and resolute. Great Thorondor, I ask one more service of you. Fly over the dark fortress once more, that I might see its heart with my own eyes. The risk was immense. They were a single, luminous target against a sky of hate, but the Eagle King understood the value of such a vantage point. With a powerful beat of his wings, he banked, turning back toward the volcanic valley. From that impossible height, Galadriel saw everything. She mapped the forges belching fire, the barracks housing legions of orcs, the deep pits where siege engines were being assembled. She saw the patterns of their marches and the locations of their command posts, committing it all to a memory that had been trained by months of desperate observation. This was no longer the intelligence of a scout. It was the strategic overview of a general. Her daring overflight provided the Free Peoples with their first true understanding of the enemy's scale and order of battle, information that would be priceless in the wars to come. As Thorondor finally turned his course south, carrying her toward the havens of Círdan, the story of her rescue began to spread ahead of them on the swift wings of hope. The tale of the Lady of Light, saved by the Eagles of Manwë, became a legend whispered in every hidden elven refuge and every sturdy dwarven hall. It was a symbol, a tangible sign that the valor had not wholly forsaken Middle-earth, and that even in the deepest shadow, a spark of grace could still intervene. Hearts long burdened by despair felt a flicker of rekindled courage. Soaring high above the lands she had traversed on foot, Galadriel looked down upon the dark forests, the treacherous mountains, and the hidden valleys. She saw not just a map of her journey, but a training ground for her spirit. Every trial, from the silent wisdom of the Nandor to the stone-cold resolve of the dwarves, had been a lesson. Her path had not been a random wandering, but a deliberate preparation, forging her into a leader who understood that the coming war would be won not by one people alone, but by the unity of all free folk. The salt-scoured timbers of Círdan's hall felt both familiar and alien as Galadriel stood before the assembled lords of the Falas. This time, she did not speak of visions, but of facts. She laid out her meticulously drawn maps, pointing to the locations of forges, the troop capacities of barracks, and the precise hierarchy of the enemy command she had witnessed with her own eyes. She spoke of their discipline, their industrial might, and their chilling coordination, but she also detailed their critical weakness, a reliance on centralized command that could be shattered, as she had proven, by severing key links. Her testimony, backed by the undeniable truth of her survival and the eagle's intervention, cut through the chamber's lingering suspicion. The silence that followed was not one of doubt, but of grim absorption. Plans for reinforcing the harbor defenses and establishing early warning beacons along the coast began to take shape, a direct result of the intelligence she had bled to acquire. Yet, a faction led by the ever-wary Thranduil remained unmoved. Your foray into the mountains was a spark thrown into a powder keg, he argued, his voice cold. You may have gained us a season, but you have ensured that when the storm breaks, it will fall upon us with a wrath tenfold. This fear that her courage had been a provocation created a political rift that no amount of strategic detail could fully mend. Galadriel listened to their fears, and in that moment, she made a surprising choice. She would not fight for a title or a formal command. Instead, she stepped away from the council table and into the training grounds. She began to teach, sharing the hard-won skills of her journey, how to read the subtle signs of a corrupted land, how to bind wounds with light and herb, and how to move with a silence learned from the Nandor. This humble work, this investment in the community's strength, rather than her own status, did more to build trust than any political argument ever could. As the western havens fortified themselves, a tense quiet settled over the coast. This was not peace, but the drawn breath before a scream. The enemy was not gone. They were regrouping, and their delayed offensive would return with a force meant to erase all resistance. The survival of this civilization would hinge on whether its people could stand as one. One evening, while guiding a young healer in the art of listening to the pain within a withered leaf, a gentle pull tugged at Galadriel's spirit. It was the sapling from Balor, its faint light pulsing in its protective wrap, a soft, persistent call for a permanent home, a sanctuary where its roots could at last touch the earth. The hidden valley near the river Sirion was a cradle of deep silence, its soil rich with the memory of untouched rains. Here, Galadriel knelt, her hands not holding a weapon, but cupping the fragile roots of the sapling from Balor. She cleared a circle of earth, her movements a ritual of care, and began to sing. Her voice was not a command, but an invitation, a melody of deep roots and starlight on water that wove a permanent ward of protection into the very air. As she placed the young tree into the ground, its roots took hold with an audible sigh, and its leaves began to glow with a soft, unwavering light that pulsed in time with the valley's own hidden heart. The sapling did not merely grow, it ascended, its trunk thickening, and its branches reaching for the sky in the span of a single moon cycle, until it stood as a young white tree, a pillar of living memory in the wild. Its radiance was a gentle tide that washed through the valley, strengthening the colors of the flowers and silencing the whispers of decay. For any elf who wandered near, lost or weary, the sight of that tree was a physical ache of hope, a reminder of a home beyond the sea, and a promise that such light could still flourish in Middle-earth. This new beacon, however, could not remain unseen. In the following nights, shadows began to gather at the edge of the tree's influence. Twisted wolves with eyes of cinder prowled just beyond the light, and once, a band of goblins, drawn by the tales of a new power, attempted to rush the grove under the cover of a moonless sky. Galadriel met them not with a grand display of force, but with a precise and unyielding defense. She stood her ground before the white tree, her own light merging with its glow to form a barrier that burned the creature's eyes and turned their crude blades. These were minor skirmishes, but they were a constant test of her vigilance, a reminder that any place of peace must be fiercely guarded. Watching the tree's light hold the darkness at bay, she understood that a symbol was not enough. It needed a community. She made a deliberate choice, one that would define her legacy. She would not keep this sanctuary for herself. Instead, she began to shape the land around the tree, creating a small, hidden haven. She guided the growth of thorny bushes to form a natural wall, and directed the course of a small spring to create a clear pool at the tree's base. This was to be a refuge, a neutral ground where the Noldor, the Sindar, and even the Green Elves could meet without the weight of their ancient grievances, a living testament to her belief that their strength lay in unity. The stakes of her quiet work were immense. Every day the tree stood, its light grew stronger, and every day it remained undiscovered was a victory. But its very existence was a direct challenge to the shadow in the north, a declaration that the ancient light had taken root once more. If its location were ever discovered, a full-scale assault would be inevitable, and the loss would be catastrophic, not just of a tree, but of the fragile hope for unity it represented. As the white tree's roots delved deep into the heart of the valley, intertwining with the bedrock of the land, a messenger, breathless and grim, found the hidden path to her sanctuary. He bore a personal summons, a plea written in her brother Finrod's own hand, calling her to Nargothrond. The political heart of Beleriand was stirring, and her hard-won wisdom was now required in the halls of power. The halls of Nargothrond were a river of living stone, their ceilings set with countless gems that glittered like a captive star-strewn sky. Finrod Felagund met his sister not with a formal embrace, but by falling into step beside her, their shared silence speaking volumes after their long separation. He led her through the thrumming heart of his underground kingdom, a marvel of dwarven craft and elven song, and as they walked, they began to weave the threads of their separate journeys into a single, urgent tapestry. He spoke of his own hidden city, built as a fortress and a refuge, a work of creation in defiance of the shadow. She told him of poisoned valleys and awakened spirits, of dwarven allies and the relentless, organized malice she had charted in the volcanic north. Their shared love for Middle-earth was a bridge, yet their philosophies of protection stood on opposite banks. Finrod believed in building sanctuaries, strongholds of memory and beauty that could withstand the ages. Galadriel argued for a shield that extended beyond any single wall, an alliance of all free peoples that could meet the storm in the open field. It was a reconciliation, not of surrender, but of synthesis, each recognizing the strength in the other's vision. Their private council, however, could not remain insulated from the old, bitter politics of their people. Lords of the Sindar, who had sworn allegiance to Finrod, watched their reunion with deep suspicion. At a feast held in her honor, a Sindarin noble raised a toast that was laced with venom. "We welcome the daughter of Finarfin," he said, his voice carrying through the grand hall. "May her presence not reawaken the doom that her kin brought upon us all." The room fell silent. The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the Noldor's bloody landing on these shores and the curse that the valor had laid upon them for the kinslaying at Alqualandet. The old argument had found them, a ghost that demanded to be fed. Galadriel felt the weight of every eye upon her, the collective memory of a transgression she herself had not committed, yet whose shadow she carried. She could have defended her family's pride, listing their noble deeds and their own sufferings. She could have retreated into cold dignity. Instead, she chose a harder path. She stood, her gaze meeting that of the noble, and then sweeping across the entire assembly. "The doom of Mandos is a weight we carry," she acknowledged, her voice clear and without defiance. "It is the echo of a choice made in fire and grief. But I have walked the wild lands, and I have seen a darkness that does not care for the quarrels of elves. It will consume the blameless and the guilty alike. Our only hope is not to outrun a curse, but to build something so meaningful that the curse loses its power to define us." She turned her focus to Finrod, her plea as much for him as for the listening lords. "We cannot change the past, brother, but we can choose the legacy we build from its ashes. Do not let guilt for an old sin paralyze us against a new evil. Look forward to the redemption we can forge together." In that moment, she chose to forgive the lingering resentment of the Sindar, and more importantly, to forgive the inherited shame that haunted her own brother. She urged him to see their future not as a sentence to be endured, but as a possibility to be created. Finrod, moved by her unwavering clarity and the memory of their shared foresight, finally nodded. His support was not just familial loyalty, It was a strategic pivot. He would use his profound influence, his friendships with both dwarves and men, to open the doors she could not. He would endorse her vision of a grand alliance. The stakes of their collaboration were now cosmic. A united front of Nargothrond, Doriath, and the Fallas could genuinely challenge Morgoth's dominion, turning a scattered resistance into a coordinated war. Yet this very unity risked drawing the direct gaze of the Valar, reminding them of the exiled Noldor's ambition, and potentially reaffirming the doom they labored under. It was a gamble of breathtaking scale, betting the future of Beleriand on the hope that a shared cause could transcend a divine curse. With a renewed sense of purpose forged in that glittering hall, brother and sister turned from reflection to action. They began to draft the first plans for a great council, a gathering of elves, dwarves, and even the fledgling houses of men, to be held in a neutral ground, far from the old capitals and their ancient grudges. It was a daring bid to weave a new tapestry of allegiance, one strong enough to hold back the night. The clear waters of Ithel Ivrin reflected a fractured sky, and for the first time, that sky was filled with the banners of many peoples. Galadriel had chosen this place for its purity, a symbol of the new beginning they so desperately needed to forge. Here, on the neutral ground, she had sanctified representatives of the Noldor, the Sindar, the Dwarves of Nogrod, and the newly arrived Edain, gathered in a tense circle. The air was thick not with the spring's mist, but with the weight of ancient grievances and raw, immediate fear. Galadriel moved among them not as a queen, but as a weaver, her voice a calm thread, attempting to bind frayed edges into something stronger than their separate strands. She began not with demands, but with a simple, shared truth. "We all draw water from the same well of hope," she stated, her gaze sweeping across the diverse assembly. "And that well is being poisoned from a single northern source." The initial discussions were halting, filled with suspicion. The dwarves, led by the pragmatic Bofri, eyed the elven lords with a warrior's caution, while the Sindar watched the fiery-haired Noldor with barely concealed resentment over past sins. The Edain, tall and grim-faced, stood as silent observers, their own survival hanging on the outcome of this elven debate. The first major conflict erupted over strategy. The dwarves argued for a war of fortification, of sealing their mountain halls and letting the storm break upon unyielding stone. The elven lords of Nargothrond advocated for swift, targeted strikes from their hidden city. And the Sindar, led by a still skeptical Thranduil, insisted their only duty was to strengthen the Girdle of Melian and let the rest of the world fend for itself. Voices rose, echoing off the surrounding cliffs. "You would have us bleed in the open fields for your pride," one dwarf lord boomed at a Noldor commander. "And you would hide in your caves until the shadow finds the key to your front gate," the elf retorted. Galadriel let the anger spend itself, feeling the fragile council teeter on the brink of dissolution. This was the test. Force would shatter it. Appeasement would render it useless. She stepped into the center of the circle, and her presence alone commanded a strained silence. She did not take a side. Instead, she reframed the entire argument. "A mountain cannot hide from a flood that drowns the valleys," she said, her voice clear. "A single strike cannot fell a forest of hatred, and no wall, no matter how enchanted, can stand forever if the land around it is reduced to ash. Our strength is not in our separateness, but in our connection." The Dwarven fortresses are the anvil, the Elven mobility is the hammer, and the vigilance of Doriath is the shield that guards our collective flank. To make this work, however, required a structure no one had ever conceived. She then unveiled her proposal, a decision born from her journey through countless fractured communities. Leadership, she suggested, would not reside with one people or one king. It would rotate. A council of captains, with a voice from each realm, would guide their shared defense. Each people would maintain its autonomy, its own ways of war and rule, but they would be bound by a pact of mutual aid and a single, coordinated strategy. It was a radical idea, a balance of power that respected tradition while demanding unprecedented trust. The debate that followed was fierce, but it was a debate over how, not if. The Edain, who had been silent until now, spoke of the vast hosts they had fled, giving grim numbers to the enemy's strength, and finally tipping the scales from argument to necessity. Slowly, grudgingly, the first formal alliances of the age were sworn there by the pristine springs. Pledges of shared ore from the dwarves, of healing lore from the elves, and of the steadfast strength of men were exchanged. It was a victory, but a fragile one, with old suspicions merely buried, not gone. The council concluded with a cautious, hard-won optimism, a sense that a new thread had been woven into the tapestry of fate. But as the representatives began to disperse, a group of mud-spattered scouts, their eyes wide with urgency, broke into the clearing. They brought word from the western coast. The enemy was on the move, not in a scattered raid, but in a massive, coordinated fleet. Their first target was not a mountain or a hidden city, but the open harbors and shipyards of the Fallas. Smoke stained the western horizon, a great black smudge against the sea and sky. Galadriel arrived at the Fallas to a scene of controlled chaos. The air rang with the frantic sounds of hammers on timber and the shouted orders of captains. She went directly to Círdan, and without ceremony, they fell into a grim, efficient partnership. He knew the strength of his walls and the courage of his mariners. She knew the enemy's mind, their tactics, their relentless patterns. Together, they transformed the frantic preparations into a calculated defense, shifting reserves to the weakest points in the seawall and positioning their most skilled archers to cover the approaches. Her presence on the battlements became a fixed point in the storm, a calm voice that cut through the din, and the defenders, seeing her unwavering resolve, found their own fears hardening into a determined will to hold. The enemy fleet appeared at dawn, a forest of black sails emerging from the haze. Their assault was a two-pronged hammer blow. From the sea, ships laden with heavily armored orcs rammed the harbor defenses, while on land, massive siege towers crawled forward like monstrous beetles, their protected archers raining down a constant, deadly fire. Galadriel's foresight proved vital. She anticipated the main landing point, and when the enemy swarmed the seawall, they were met with a withering volley of elven arrows and a wall of spears. For a day and a night, they held, but the sheer weight of numbers was a tide that could not be held back forever. Sections of the outer wall were breached, and the fighting descended into desperate, close-quarter struggles in the narrow streets of the harbor town. Each alley became a killing ground, and every fallen defender was a loss that could not be replaced. Watching from a high tower, Galadriel saw the true threat. Behind the enemy lines, teams of trolls were assembling massive battering rams and wheeled siege ladders. It was only a matter of time before these machines shattered the inner gates. To remain behind the walls was to wait for certain death. She faced a terrible choice, a commander's nightmare. She could conserve her forces and try to endure the coming onslaught, sacrificing the outer city for a last stand at the citadel. Or she could gamble everything on one bold stroke. She turned to Círdan. "We must destroy their engines," she said, her voice flat with the gravity of the decision. "If we do not, these walls will be our tomb." The sortie was a desperate, beautiful, and terrifying thing. The main gate swung open, and Galadriel led a picked force of the swiftest and most lethal warriors out into the carnage. They did not charge as a solid block, but flowed like quicksilver, a coordinated dance of death. Elven blades flashed in the smoky air, cutting a path directly toward the siege works. Galadriel fought at their head, her own sword a blur of silver light, but her true weapon was her mind, directing the flow of the battle, anticipating enemy counter-thrusts, and ensuring their line of retreat back to the gate remained open. It was a mission that relied entirely on speed, surprise, and her absolute trust in every elf who fought beside her. As they neared the first great battering ram, dousing it with oil and setting it ablaze, she looked up across the churning battlefield. There, atop a distant rise, sat the enemy commander on his monstrous steed. His gaze was fixed on her, a cold, calculating acknowledgement passing between them. The personal duel she had sensed in the northern wastes had now found its field. The inner gate splintered into 1,000 shards of screaming wood. Through the breach, the enemy commander strode, his armored form a silhouette of absolute shadow against the burning city behind him. The last defenders fell back, their lines broken, their hope extinguished. Only Galadriel remained, standing between the invader and the heart of the Fallas. She did not raise her sword. Instead, she let it fall, the ring of steel on stone a punctuation in the sudden stillness. She opened her hands empty and vulnerable, and allowed the light within her to burn at its fullest, a small, brilliant sun in the twilight of the battle. The commander halted, his own dark power coiling around him like a shroud. He expected a challenge, a final, glorious clash of wills. He did not expect the vision she offered. It was not a weapon, but a gift, poured directly from her spirit into his. She gave him the memory of the starlit seas of Cuvianan, where the first elves awoke to a sky brimming with silent wonder. She sang into his mind the first notes of the music of the Ainur, the theme of creation that had shaped the world before shadow had a name. It was the echo of what he had been, a being of order and light, a guardian of beauty before the long, bitter fall into service of the Dark Lord. For a terrible, breathless moment, the shadow around him writhed. Deep within the pits of his armored helm, a pinprick of silver light flickered, a single, struggling star in a void of night. His weapon, poised to strike, wavered, the memory of a purpose older than hate, of a loyalty to something beyond destruction, touched a part of him he had thought long dead. It was not enough to redeem him, not in an instant, but it was enough to make him hesitate. It was enough to create a crack in the absolute certainty of his assault. That single moment of hesitation was the turning point. The defenders, who had been on the verge of rout, saw their lady standing unarmed before the embodiment of their terror, her light holding the darkness at bay. Her courage was a spark thrown onto the tinder of their own hearts. A cry went up, not of fear, but of fury and hope. From the side streets and the battered ramparts, the combined forces of the Fallas surged forward. Elves, dwarves, and men, their differences forgotten in the shared need to protect the one who had first believed they could stand together, fell upon the enemy vanguard with a renewed, desperate strength. The commander, shaken from his reverie, found his advance suddenly blunted, his forces recoiling from this unexpected, unified counterattack. The breach was sealed not with stone, but with living bodies and a rekindled will. Galadriel had not defeated him with force. She had defeated his purpose by reminding him of its hollow core, her choice to appeal to a shred of lost goodness, to believe that even the most corrupted spirit might still remember the light, had created the fragile opening that saved the city. In that choice, she proved that the most profound strength is not the power to dominate, but the courage to offer redemption. The battle was not yet over, but its tide had turned on a moment of compassion, a lesson that would echo through all the wars to come. The harbor air still tasted of smoke, but beneath it now lay the clean scent of salt and sawdust, the sounds of rebuilding echoing the rhythms of the sea. The Fallas stood, its walls scarred but unbroken, and in the eyes of the survivors, Galadriel saw a new light, one forged in shared sacrifice. They did not call her a princess or a warrior, but a unifier, a beacon who had reminded them that their separate strengths could weave a shield no single army could shatter. Standing on the quiet battlements at dawn, she looked not at the repaired stone, but inward, at the path that had led her here. It had begun with a single step beyond the Girdle of Melian, a choice driven by a need to see the wide world for herself. She had faced the suspicion of the Nandor, the ancient grief of the Ent-Wife, the cunning of the Dwarves, and the consuming rage of a fallen Maia. In each trial, she had been tested not merely on her skill with a blade or the force of her light, but on her capacity to understand. True power, she now saw with crystalline clarity, did not flow from the ability to command or dominate. It sprang from the courage to listen, to see the world through the eyes of others, and to offer compassion even to a lost and corrupted spirit. It was this empathy, this deep and patient understanding, that had healed valleys, turned rivals into allies, and in the final hour the Fallas had held back the shadow with a memory of starlight. Far from the coast, in the hidden valley, she had made her sanctuary. The white tree continued its silent, steadfast growth. Its leaves shimmered with a light that was both a memory and a promise, a living testament to the fragile, enduring goodness she had nurtured in the heart of Middle-earth. The shadow in the north was not gone. It was a wound upon the world, patient and brooding, and the wars to come would be longer and darker than any yet seen. But the foundations of resistance were now laid, a network of trust and shared purpose that stretched from the deep delvings of the Dwarves to the starlit woods of the Sindar. Galadriel felt the weight of this beginning settle upon her, not as a burden, but as a purpose. Her untold journey from the sheltered woods of Doriath to the front lines of a world's struggle had been but the first chapter. She was a guardian now, a keeper of light in a land still waiting for its dawn, and she knew her watch would stretch across ages yet unnamed, a steadfast presence in the long twilight before the age of men.
you.